Hello and welcome to today's webinar on increasing brand trust, understanding 7 key views consumers have on their data. I'm Megan Winnery, Senior Demand Gen Manager at Telium, and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar will last approximately 60 minutes and will be recorded. And the slides and the recording of the presentation will be made available at the end of the session. Please note that you'll find some related resources in the attachment section that you can view during or after the webinar. And we want to hear your questions, so please use the Ask a Question feature to submit them. And for any questions that we aren't able to answer live, we'll be sure to follow up with you after the webinar is over. And lastly, you'll see the social hashtag for today's webinar in the lower right-hand corner of our deck, hashtag Telium Brand Trust Webinar. We encourage you to retweet, like, and share as we live tweet throughout the webinar. And now for today's speaker. Lindsay McEwen has almost 20 years of proven strategic leadership and commercial management expertise gained within leading marketing and technology businesses. His previous roles include Director of Sales at Adobe Systems UK, Managing Director at Neolane Software, acquired by Adobe, as well as positions with Oracle, Tibco, and Kana. All right, Lindsay, over to you.
Thank you, Megan. So today we're going to share some very interesting information. It's been information that we've gained from a series of questions that we asked to a large pool of consumers with a partner of ours, DataIQ. But before I talk about DataIQ, let's talk about today's agenda. We're going to look at some of the pivotal changes to the data landscape and how they've affected us. We're going to look at the 7 key findings from those great questions that we asked those consumers and try and provide you with examples and practical steps around improving consumer trust. So, DataIQ. Who are the research business that we worked with? DataIQ are a European-based organization that really are interested in the consumer's perspective on how we use data. What sort of consents, controls that exist within the world of data privacy. The research was built around some key areas of data protection. We asked people about how they felt being tracked across mobile and traditional digital, whether relevance and accuracy of data, how ready they were, and really how technology helped them understand that the use of private data could really improve consumer trust and give us what we want at the end of this. And that is better experiences. 25th of May 2018, the world of GDPR came upon us. The data protection regulation really gave us not just a regulation, but more importantly, a regulator. It gave us an organization who had overwatch around multiple businesses' use of private data. It governed how they would collect data. It governed them how they would store it, what consents they would ask from individuals before that data could be used. And really they gave us a framework to allow personal data to come under legislation that made it safe, that made it easy to curate, and gave each country's ICO the ability to look at how businesses wanted to use consumer data and provide an overall protection for the consumer to do so. Because the world has changed. The CDO is no longer the Chief Digital Officer. He is now the Chief Data Officer. Organizations have really understood that data is now not just something that they have to collect, but something that they have to collect, store, enrich, and use to power the interactions that they have with consumers. The Chief Data Officer is the person responsible for ensuring that organizations carry the prospects of GDPR to their very heart, to make sure that all data is collected in a safe manner, to make sure that the consumer is consistently asked about what data that they allow a business to both collect, use, and forward throughout the world. And it's got much deeper than just real-time visitor behavior. The world has now turned to the concept of dark data. And this is really enabling businesses to look back at historical context. I'm so old, I would have traditionally called this analytics. But the world has moved on. It is separated into two camps. We have data analysts and data activists. The analysts build historical models that allow organizations to predict how visitors may react based on those historical models. Activists look at real-time, first-party data that's been collected within the organization, and they look to influence processes and outputs based on how that data flows through those processes. It's the difference between looking back and looking forward. Both are extremely important. The future of data. Well, those of you who've read Homo sapiens or Homo Deus would believe that billions of us will be unemployed by an algorithm and will be unemployable because of the jobs that we have. I certainly wouldn't want to be a young, aspiring doctor, because as I look towards the future of medicine, I see hundreds of algorithmic doctors connected together. Instead of one doctor's communication skills on how they can extract symptoms from a patient, imagine a world where an algorithm has already processed that data from a wearable by the time the individual has sat in front of them. Imagine a doctor who is connected immediately to the experiences, learnings, and understandings of every other doctor in the country, in the region, or perhaps even the world. Algorithmic processing and machine learning is the future. The ability for automation to be managed by robotics is the future. The success of this future will rely upon our ability to combine scenarios, increase understandings, but more importantly, feed these algorithms with the right consumer data. The fourth industrial revolution will be powered by data as the new oil. It will be so relevant to make sure that these algorithms that are processing some of the largest decisions inside industry are fed with the right consumer data. Think about the four industrial revolutions as they've transpired. The first was about the division of labor. The second was about building machines to replace people as part of that process. The third being computerization. And the fourth industrial revolution is really about robotics and algorithms taking over some of the more menial or the more learning intense roles that exist within society. The correct data fed into those algorithms will ensure that the right goods and services are offered to individuals, that the right decisions are made based on how a particular algorithm sees the predicament in front of it. Imagine how relevant that data collection is when we're talking about medicine, the military, or the law, where a huge amount of data crunching takes place to make split-second decisions based on people's health, safety, and security. Data will fuel this revolution. So let's get on to looking at the 7 distinct consumer views that we had. We asked a series of questions trying to understand each one of these different consumer views, trying to understand what modern attitudes were towards the collection and sharing of personal data, to try and understand if people had seen how data protection had affected them and whether or not the actual legislation that was in situation now was giving people comfort, or even if they knew anything about it. Seeing how people felt about being tracked across mobile and digital websites, understanding whether or not the experiences that they were given from each one of these specific channels and the services that came with them were delighting them or exciting them. Figuring out how those experiences really impacted them, had personalization modernized in a way that we will talk about through this consumer view? Has it moved on from gender-specific greetings and content blocks to the nuances of personalization? And then really seeing how consumers dealt with and what their expectations were for multi-device tracking. So let's get into the consumer views. Number one, what were consumer attitudes towards sharing personal data? Now, if you look at the screen here, you'll see that we've tracked this across 3 separate surveys. And you can see the most exciting thing that I see about this is year on year, more and more people are trusting. More and more people are saying that if the right data is shared, and you kind of need to share your data to participate in the modern digital economy, then the more you trust the organization that you're sharing that data with, the more data you will share. And we've seen examples of this across multiple organizations who've actually been extremely transparent and open about what they use personal data for. We've seen consent forms for people to fill in upon coming into a digital estate that are extremely granular, that break it down to absolute product offerings, to processing, to segmentation, so that organizations give a really trusted, open, transparent view. And it seems to be impacting because more people are happy to trust a company and share data, and less people are cautious and prefer not to share data. What is really interesting is a third of consumers, they really are regularly reviewing, updating, and looking about the amount of personal data that they make available to brands. People are not just consenting once, they're consenting multiple times. Oh, and by the way, it doesn't matter what age group we asked. If we went to the younger age groups, these are very agile, they switch brands very quickly, they really have a fleeting interaction with multiple brands. So you have a limited number of events in which to get it right. So again, sharing that data and giving us an ability to offer the goods, products and services that are ingested by young people is extremely important. However, if you move to the older section of society where people are traditionally more loyal, and I'm talking 35 to 55, they want to narrow the amount of brands that they interact with. They want to trust implicitly and be loyal to a brand. But that means they want deeper experiences. They want personalized offers and content based on how they interact with their brand. The younger generation, they just want you to use the data, understand the data as quickly as possible, and give them a product that is good and relevant based on who they are. So, Telium's view on the attitude towards sharing personal data. Well, I've said it enough times, transparency is the key here. It's the ability to show people at a granular level what pathways they will undertake or their data will undertake in a relationship with you as a brand. Half of the consumers, they will take the time to read your consent details. They will read them in full and they will ensure that the granularity that you've presented inside that consent form will give them the ability to safely protect the journey that they're on. Transparency is the key. If people can look into how you share data and you can give them a value exchange, what do I mean by a value exchange? Give me your data, I'll give you something valuable in exchange. So many organizations are now working this. I saw some terrible examples of it in GDPR when my local restaurant offered me a £10 voucher to consent to give them permission to communicate with them. I took great pleasure in informing that very nice local eatery that actually that was against the rules of GDPR. But what they were really trying to do was pull me into the process. They immediately apologized, took the offer off, and then replaced that with a transparent view of why they needed my data. Well, they could invite me to more events. They could make sure that the events they were inviting me to were more appropriate to my age group. I don't want to go to the all-night rave. I want to go to the all-night oyster session. So it's really about making sure that transparency and consent really give me the ability to offer the appropriate service. Consumer awareness. There has been a huge amount of front page awareness from the media of the negative side of data protection. We have seen breaches from telecommunication companies, from the infamous Facebook and Cambridge Analytica press that hit. Basically, organizations were using data in an uncompliant way. So let's see how aware consumers were of data protection. Well, interestingly, the difference between last year and this year is there was a significant drop of people who were no longer aware. Almost 20% drop in people who had not heard anything about data protection. And look at the increase of those individuals who were fully aware of what was going on in the world of data protection. 22% of all the consumers were fully aware of their data protection rights. People are passionate about this subject. In a modern society, they believe it's one of the last things of value they can offer an organization. And organizations are also extremely aware how valuable personal data is. If you can give people an understanding of the law that exists, make them fully aware, not partially aware, but fully aware of the protections that exist within the GDPR to protect that individual, then let's hope that puts that trusted kite mark on the side of your business and pulls them towards you, giving you more data, giving you more insight, allowing you to give them better application to goods, products, and services. So how can we increase brand trust whilst being aware of data protection? Well, it's to ensure that you continue to develop your GDPR strategy. It's important that you talk about it at all times. It's important that the technologies that you use fall under the safe collection, curation, and storage of GDPR compliant data. Think about it. In our questions, 20% of the people said they would avoid the brands that track them and don't offer the choice not to track them. So it's very important that you offer people choice. They can use the laws that protect the use of their data, or they can just choose not to give you data. Now we are seeing more and more data collection within a GDPR-ready business being focused on direct data collection. It's no longer out there from search engines. It's no longer out there from social network. We're really talking about first-party data. That's the data that we collect off your consumers as they interact with our brand. It has changed, and to increase the awareness of law and trust, you must be transparent, as we've said a multitude of times before. So how are consumer attitudes towards mobile and digital tracking, how are they changing in this modern environment? When you look at the proliferation of mobile phones into how people interact with brands, it is increasing dramatically at a very, very high rate. So let's see what the consumers said about it. Well, interestingly, attitudes have changed. The great news is it's about choice. If you look at the 2018 feedback, when we asked people about their attitudes towards mobile and digital tracking, you will see that reasonably consistently between the trusting and rational groups, they were okay as long as they had a choice. Even when you get down to cautious, they have a huge amount of belief in mobile and digital tracking as long as they have the choice to do or not. It's great in the trusting community that we are now seeing people understand less, that they'd rather not share data, What concerns me the most is still in the rational groups. People are still not entirely comfortable. And that really is up to us as brands to give people a better attitude towards digital tracking. Because 55% of consumers, they think that privacy is very important. Over half the people we spoke to understood how extremely important it was to protect their private data in a way that made them happy and consummate within the bounds of the law. I think that this is something that falls on the sides of the brands. So let's look at some of the things that we can do to give people a better attitude towards mobile and digital tracking. Choice seems to be the key. Giving people an education as to what you're going to do with their digital data, and then giving that individual the opportunity to opt in or opt out of how that data is either tracked, collected, stored, and used is important. Having the right kind of preference tools at the center of your organization, making sure that data is only shared when consent is given by the consumer. I think it's important allowing transparency in that particular data collection exercise. Actually letting people to understand what happens to their data. Allowing them to figure out what the journey is. And always giving your consumers multiple options to opt out, which at the moment seems like an onerous and difficult task for marketers in a modern age, but it's essential that people have repeated options to look at the choice they have to move to the next step. The value exchange we talked about earlier is about giving people consistent experiences with a brand so they become more trusting, not less trusting. And lastly, allowing the consumer to be in control. Control to the consumer and a proper environment to collect, curate, and use data. This is going to encourage a repeat of views to your brand. It will increase brand loyalty to the fact that the younger people may even have some, and the older people will have a deeper understanding of how loyalty can affect them and their brand. So what is a modern consumer experience of some of these mobile and data-driven services? Again, when we looked at mobile and data, one of the most prolific questions that always comes up is location. The great news is digital and mobile are equal. People are more comfortable operating across both of those instances. So that's great. The world of mobile is finally getting the respect that it's longly desired. I'm pleased to see mobile slightly sneak away when a site or an application may be aware of location, but I think that's probably quite normal as most of those apps on the mobile are really looking at location. I think what's really interesting this is the fact that location is now being understood as an important personal data feed that people have power over and they want to use. We've all seen some fantastic guerrilla marketing campaigns recently in both our customers and other customers. I saw a fantastic campaign drive across a limited trainer manufacturer in that they made people log in to their website app as part of their loyalty agreement. Part of the conditions of logging in to the loyalty app meant that you allowed the organization to track you as you would pass around the shopping centers where they had beacons in. Cleverly, when you crossed the threshold of a competitor's store, they would send a push notification to your mobile phone giving you a 99% discount off any product in store and having that discount drop by 1% for every second it took you to get from the competitor's store to their store. Now think about the amount of data that is required to make that computation. But more importantly, think about the nirvana they've given that marketing team. Never mind influencing a moment of truth as it happens. What about stealing a moment of truth from under the nose of the competitors? A real-time use of technology, a real-time example of how organizations could advance their particular mobile and data-driven services if they really allowed location to be part of the world. And remember, it's not just physical location that people are concerned about. It's about their location upon digital estates. How many of us are tired about seeing the same old ads for a product that we bought many years ago? The same log cabin that you looked at one evening in 1997 still appears in the banner ad multitudes of times no matter where you go. And that concerns consumers. They worry that those ads are not just working off old technologies, but those are adverts that are actually following them. So how can you give people a better experience? Well, content based on interests, I think is really the key for what we're really trying to do here. Remember, this is not a nefarious way in which we can track individuals' personal data. Organizations, brands, products, goods and services, they are trying to form a relationship with a consumer to give them what they want. They want to use technology to make sure that the relevant pieces of data can be analyzed, and personalization can enhance just from that gender-specific welcome to that gender-specific product, but more into understanding the nuances of how individuals interact across the multiple touch points that they have within your business. One of the most important things is maturing the level of data collection, adoption, and more importantly, how you are using data within your business to make better decisions. Managing a single view of a consumer in your business and sharing that with all of the applications that exist in your organization is the key to giving people cross-domain, cross-device, better, trusted, more open services. If I feel as if you're dealing with me and my data as an individual, I will interact with you across your multiple touch points in a more confident, more comfortable, and more considered way. So, what did consumers think about some of the modern mobile and digital experiences that they were seeing? Well, I always used to find the 2017 title quite concerning for me, because really, after 25 plus years in digital marketing and data collection, what upset me the most is most organizations, most individuals, and consumers out there in society were just happy that we could autofill forms when they wanted to complete them online. And that was a real wake-up call for not only consumers, but also technologies. Because what we realized is we weren't really offering the value that we talked about earlier to people in order for them to be comfortable sharing data. We were quite simply giving them a way in which they could fill out a form a bit quicker. Fast forward to 2018, I am over the moon to see that yes, shortcuts are still very important, but personalized offers come swiftly. That content reflects individuals' interests is now almost as much as shortcuts. That brands know individuals and that content is truly personalized. People are becoming more and more excited about personalized offers. They are becoming more and more excited about content being offered based on them and their experience. I personally get very excited about mobile and digital experiences, as you would expect me to. One of the things that lets me down somewhat, however, is I have a confusing first name. My first name is Lindsay. In my country, that is gender inspecific. It is both a male and a female name. I spend a lot of time having experiences with organizations who don't address me by the correct gender. An interesting one I had the other day was an organisation who bought me an extremely nice bottle of wine to thank me for the 10th stay at their hotel. It was waiting in my room when I got there, along with a handwritten card. And on the handwritten card, it was addressed to Mrs. McEwen. Now think about it. Not only did that brand give me a poor experience, but they spent money on giving me a poor experience. And I checked in 10 times. They could have figured out who I was very quickly by a mere checkbox on a check-in screen and been able to give me a positive experience that I shared 100 times instead of a negative experience that I'm sharing with all of you. So consumers really, really expect a special offer. It's back to that value exchange. If you're going to use my personal data, please ensure you give me something of value in riposte. So, what do we draw from some of these ratings? Well, consumers are positive. If it gives them better experiences, they'll be positive about sharing data. If the experiences are tailored to them and how they provided data to those brands, guess what? They find them positive. We think that customer profiles are the key. We think that having a customer profile that contains not just data about that individual, but also about their preferences, keeping that at the center of your business and using that to share with your organization, that's the key to a correct consumer interaction. So, have consumer attitudes towards personalization in these two very exciting channels, mobile and digital, have they changed at all? And are people seeing them in a different way? Well, I think personalization on each one of these channels is now being widely accepted. Over 30% of the people who we questioned said that they would be okay having some form of personalization. But two things really struck me about this question. Firstly, it's about choice. I'd be very happy to share my data as long as you give me a choice not to. I think what I find interesting is that individuals, when asked, enjoyed an experience when it was beneficial. So the converse of that statement is when you get the experience wrong because you've perhaps made assumptions and not determined what experience to give an individual, can have a huge impact. What I like is more people are interested in mobile than traditionally were, and I like, again, the equity between mobile and digital. I think it's great to see both channels coming into great fruition. But remember, almost half of consumers that we asked towards personalization preferred not to provide personal data. So it's not right for everyone. So what do we think? Well, Jeff Bezos, when he holds any meeting in the Amazon building, he puts an empty chair in the room. And that chair is to represent the consumer, the customer at the center of his business. Employing a customer at the center mandate is essential for your brand to get personalization right in these two very exciting channels. Getting messaging and campaigns based on preferences and consent that consumers have already shared, rather on what other people think they'd like to hear, is essential. Now that GDPR has given us a controlled environment in which we can collect first-party data, we no longer need to rely on unspecific data that we may have relied on in the past. The third-party data world that gave me probable lookalike audiences fantastically have been overshadowed by our agreement that first-party data is the new oil, and personalized messaging and campaigns based on the interaction of that data are the key. We would suggest that using a customer data platform at the center of your business to collect that first-party data, but more importantly, to build this rich set of data based on not only what consumers are doing across the digital devices that they use, but more importantly, in the offline. Is Lindsay McEwen on his iPhone doing something very modern? Is that the same Lindsay McEwen that comes into the store and does something not so modern? How do we concatenate those two personalities together? And how do we build a platform that allows you to use that rich set to fuel the growth of your attitude towards personalization in mobile and digital? Lastly, how do consumers perceive the world of cross-device tracking? How do we feel when we come in through an app and we get treated differently over the web? How do we feel when we come in through a traditional form and some of our more advanced online tracking devices work? So let's look at that. I think what struck me out here is in the trusting community, they expect you. They expect to have a different experience, but they do expect companies to be consistent across their multiple different cross devices. The cautious world, well, they'd prefer you not to do it. But there are still a percentage of people who, whilst cautious, expect companies to share identities cross-device. Because what's key here? What's key is you make sure that if Lindsay is determined to be Lindsay, let's treat him the same way across those devices. Whilst giving them different experiences across those different device journeys, let's make sure that I've got a transparent way of understanding that organizations will track me across the multiple of applications, devices, and touch points that I come into the business. And give an individual a view as to why cross-device tracking could help organizations serve you in a better, more productive way. Because a quarter of the consumers that we ask, they still expect their experiences to be very different, depending on the devices that they come into. However, we want to try and treat them as the same person, with the same consents, with the same preferences, so we can give them a seamless interaction with all of our brands, no matter what device that they come into us on. So in order to keep this in line with GDPR, what are the expectations that people are willing to look at? So it's about a proper GDPR strategy. It's about being very open with your GDPR strategy with your consumers. It's about ensuring that key consent mechanisms are given for online tracking. It's about ensuring that the granularity behind those consents are very simple to understand and easy to follow. It's important to adopt a deterministic resolution to the multitude of identities that come across your brand through these multitudes of entry points. Remember the Lindsay story from earlier. Probabilistically, I might not be a male. Deterministically, I am a male. So I can offer the right goods and services to me based on the right channel, the right person, at the right time. Deterministic identification of individuals across those cross devices is now easier than it used to be with the use of first-party data. Embrace it, show trust, give transparency. So, what are the key takeaways that we really got? Well, I think the most satisfying for me is that consumers, when they get a value exchange, when they feel that there is something being given to them, they are more open to share their data. They are more trusting with organizations that use their data in a safe, curatable, and GDPR compliant way. Brands were already trying to do this. And GDPR has really given us a regulation and a regulator to protect us in our ever-evolving journey with multiple brands. GDPR, it gives us a litmus test. It allows us to ask, am I being treated fairly? Is my data being treated fairly? Is it being stored correctly? And am I benefiting from this organization's use of my personal data? There's no denying it's a massive opportunity. It's no denying that organizations that can use data correctly can deliver better experiences. They can deliver more richer journeys with individuals within the world of first-party data collection and return. There is value there for us as consumers to get better goods, products, brands, and services based on a deeper interaction with those organizations. The great news is the presence of the regulator. It's put an end to the Wild West of data that existed before. A multitude of leaky data buckets, putting us not only at fiscal risk, but reputational risk, and basically not trusting the collection of this data to fuel a better experience for us as consumers. GDPR, the regulation, and GDPR, the regulator, has put an end to the Wild West. Thank you very much for your time today. Are there any questions anybody would like to ask me?
Thanks, Lindsay. All right, it's time for questions. Please use the Ask a Question feature and we'll take your questions. All right, first question. You mentioned that brands should provide transparent and traceable pathways of data usage so the consumer feels that they are part of the business strategy. How do you recommend brands do this?
Well, that's a great question. The individual who's asked it is definitely cleverer than I am, because they've answered the question very succinctly themselves. I mean, it is about providing transparency. It is about putting a detailed consent form showing individuals that the data that they're going to provide is traceable. There are a multitude of ways in which you can opt out. I think organizations really need to look at putting the customer data at the center of their business. They really need to look at building consent platforms that allows that customer data to be constantly analyzed by consumers to make sure that the right data set is being held on an organization of my own. And more importantly, they must give a multitude of points for a consumer to opt out of the passing of that data. Let's not just do it once. Let's constantly revise that trust and value exchange that we have with our consumers.
Great, thanks. All right, next question is about the Chief Data Officer. If my organization doesn't have a Chief Data Officer, who in the organization should own customer data and increasing customer trust?
Well, the Chief Data Officer really is a role that organizations should all think about having. Having in your organization somebody whose responsibility it is for the safe collection, curation, and use of data within your business is one of the tenets of GDPR as a piece of regulation. However, it's not just one person that controls this entire entity. It's more about ensuring consistently across marketing, technology, product, branding, manufacturing, and leadership, and the legal teams, that there is a quorum of individuals that are there to make sure that across all those departments, data is collected in a consistent manner. This is not one person's problem. Unless organizations build a team of representatives from all facets within the business to understand the impact of both the collection of data and the distribution of data, they could be in trouble. GDPR is a slow-moving piece of legislation, and they will look at organizations' preparedness, readiness, and how they deal with the output of non-compliance to GDPR. It's not a binary decision. They will look at to whether or not you have a team of individuals who've talked about safe curation, storage, and movement of data. They will look at whether or not there is one person responsible for data safety within your business. And they will make sure that any form of retribution placed upon you is based upon your readiness. So you don't need to have the chief data officer, but what you really need to do is to build a quorum of individuals across your business who are responsible for data.
Great. Thanks so much. Well, that's all the questions we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Lindsay, for your time and all of your knowledge.
Thank you,
Have a
Megan.
great day.